Hello and welcome to our webinar entitled Employee Engagement 101, an introduction to employee engagement. I look forward to a very good, hopefully informational webinar today. It's about a 20-minute webinar. We're going to go through a number of topics. I'm Bob Randall, and I've been involved in the engagement world for a long time. I was in the corporate world for 25 years. And also along the way, got my doctorate in organization development from the University of St. Thomas in the Twin Cities of Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota. And I've always been very passionate about this topic. So what I hope to do is hopefully have a very good discussion and definition around what is engagement, because there are a lot of different definitions of what it is and different feelings of what it means. So this is going to be recorded and will be shared. We encourage you to share this with others, and we'll definitely make it available to you through that. So what we're going to be talking about today is, I mentioned a definition. We're going to talk about where did this world of engagement come from, how is it measured, kind of at a high level, and then why does it matter so much to leaders and to organizations. So at the end of the day, we want you to be very well versed on what is engagement. And it really starts with a definition. And when I talk to leaders and people in industry, there unfortunately tends to be a lot of different definitions of engagement. So everybody kind of has their own little elevator speech, and I'd have you kind of think through, what is your elevator speech on employee engagement? What is it to you? And then maybe compare that to what is it from a couple of different worldwide organizations. One is SHRM. Their definition is that employee engagement relates to the level of an employee's commitment and connection to an organization. Other leaders and thought leaders in the field say that it's the level of emotional commitment an employee has to the organization and its goals. So we're going to really focus in on that. I'm also part of the International Standards Organization U.S. committee developing standards on employee engagement. And we're really using commitment to one's job in their organization as the definition for engagement. And that's the definition that we're going to use today, that the employee engagement is really the level of commitment employees have to their organization and to their job. So what does that mean by commitment? Essentially, we're talking about three levels of a commitment that occur. The first is the emotional commitment, and those are the employees' feelings about the company, the leaders, and their colleagues that they work with. Kind of comes from the heart. The cognitive commitment is their belief, how they think about the company, the leader, and the culture of their organization. And then there's the behavioral commitment, and that's the discretionary or extra effort employees put into their jobs, sometimes, as I said, referred to discretionary effort. So what do they do outside of the workplace? Are they thinking about their job? Are they talking to their friends about their job? That type of thing. We'll talk about how that plays out in both negative and positive ways. So the first things first, when we talk about high emotional commitment, feelings about, again, the emotional side is how one feels about their job and organization. This is kind of how that plays out from a positive standpoint. When you have high emotional commitment, you might feel proud of your organization. You feel highly connected to your workers, appreciated. You find personal meaning and fulfillment. Those are ways that you can have a positive emotional commitment to your job. His job is uninspiring and unfulfilling. So what can happen here? What would we recommend if you happen to be this employee's boss or even their friend? You can help them out. If you're going to conduct a coaching session with them, you can walk them through what we call the 4 Ds. And that would be discovery, dream, design, and destiny or delivery. And those 4 Ds were developed by a person named David Cooperrider, and this is the appreciative inquiry process. And what you might do is sit down with that employee to kind of help them get re-inspired about why they took on that job in the first place. you get them to talk about the best parts of their job, what gives them the most energy, and they get, give them time to respond to that. And then ask them, what does your dream job look like? Kind of get them to really think outside of the box about, what it is that would really get them excited to jump out of bed in the morning. And then think through, is there, within some context of your current organization, how could the company better design the job in a way that invigorates you? And as I think through that, hopefully there's a way for them to think through that, maybe there is a way for me to kind of redefine my job in a way that kind of gets me back to being excited about doing it in the first place. And then what you can do is help them co-create a plan to help them get into the job that you've ultimately designed. Is there a path forward to, if you happen to be their boss, maybe you need to go to HR. Maybe you need to think through how you're going to reorganize job duties to help this employee get re-engaged. And if you're doing it as a friend or a coach, you might have to have them think through how they could work that through within their own organizational structure. So this is the appreciative inquiry process. I found it very effective with employees that still have a ray of hope and a little bit of interest in their current job. Of course, if they're completely done, they just want to move on, then you can help them from that standpoint as well. But this might be a way to reinvigorate them within their current organization. So kind of moving back to commitment and the definitions, we talked about cognitive commitment, how one thinks about their organization, the culture, or the leader. And these are some examples of having high cognitive commitment. One employee believes in the organization's mission. One understands how their job impacts the overall results, and another one thinks that her company wisely invests, in employee development. So they just think that the organization makes good decisions. So they're able to think positively about the organization that they're in. Those with low cognitive commitment might, not think that the organization has a very bright future, or that their boss might be incompetent or a poor leader, or the organization is wasteful and just has the wrong priorities. So that would be the flip side, where you might actually measure engagement from a negative point of view. So how about the behavior side of it? We said that this was the third leg of the stool when it comes to commitment and engagement. So how does that play out? Well, an employee might really enjoy brainstorming with their coworkers whenever the opportunity arises, or they talk up their organization in the community or with their friends. Maybe they're willing to put in extra hours because they really enjoy the work that they do. Or they're decided to go into a graduate program to improve their own skills and knowledge so they can do their job better. Or they want to position themselves to do another job inside the organization. So they're really going above and beyond, putting that extra time in to make that happen. On the low side of that, maybe you've seen this before in the workplace, but some employees will shut down and stop offering innovative ideas. Some will start looking for a new job, and they're spending a lot of time and effort doing that. Others will regularly complain, or they just kind of do the bare minimum, kind of that sleepwalker at work that just kind of comes in, clocks in, and clocks out. So here's another case study. So as I mentioned earlier, this employee has kind of shut down. They kind of felt like their boss, maybe an old boss or a current boss, didn't really respect their ideas. So they've kind of shut down. And maybe there's an entire department where that's happened. So what could an organization do in that particular case? Well, one thing I've seen that's worked well is to conduct what I call a World Cafe. And this is a dialogical change method that's pretty common in organization development circles. And this is where you conduct a meeting and you invite participation and action. And essentially what you do is you pose a question to the group. So you might ask them, if they want to, if they have any new product ideas. So again, what you do is you set up maybe 4 or 5 different circular tables, and you have employees engage on that specific question. What are some new product ideas that we could generate in this organization? And you have one person kind of record and stay at the table, kind of keeping track of what people are talking about. And you have that conversation ensue for about 20 minutes. And then 4 out of the 5 people get up and they randomly go to another table. And then you conduct that same question. The person who stays at the table, the recorder, updates people on what was discussed. And then the new participants are able to build off of those conversations that took place. So what happens at the end then is you probably do that 3 or 4 times where you're cross-pollinating. You do your 20-minute discussion. People get up, randomly go to another table. And you start to dive deeper and people start to build off of each other. And you do that through conversations and dialogue. And it's a really neat way to re-engage people. And it's a neat way to pull really great ideas out of the workers that you have. And it gets them re-engaged. And then at the end of the session, what you do is you bring the big group together and kind of on a whiteboard or a big poster board, you harvest, we call that harvesting the best ideas that come out. And maybe you just put all the ideas up on a board and then you ask the group to help prioritize what they thought the best ideas were that came out. And that can be a really great way to, you'll start to feel the energy in the room build as those conversations take place. And hopefully this employee starts to get re-engaged and feels like their voice really matters and they can contribute once again to the success of the organization. So that's something to keep in mind. We talk about the 3 categories of engagement. So when we measure engagement, we usually look at employees who are fully engaged, they're committed to their job. But then unfortunately, we have a category of employees not engaged. So those are sort of I clock in, I clock out. I'm a little bit ambivalent about my job. I'm just kind of here for the paycheck. And then those who are actively disengaged are the ones who really don't want to be there. And it could be because they think the organization is no good or they don't get along with their boss, that type of thing. And those things can play out, each of those categories can play out on the emotional level, the cognitive level, and the behavioral level, as I have depicted here. So examples of fully engaged employee behaviors. Again, employees are proactively sharing ideas. They, on their own, create a mentoring program. They're recruiting their friends and others to join the organization. They're really, really fully engaged in the organization, and that plays out in some of these ways that I have listed here on the board. Examples of disengaged employees, those are the ones that are kind of the sleepwalkers at work that I mentioned earlier. They're just kind of there. They're clocking in, they're clocking out. It's kind of a lifeless organization, but they get the minimum amount of work done. Oftentimes the turnover is a little bit higher than it needs to be. Employees are coasting. There's no unified mission or any inspiration taking place. Unfortunately, it becomes kind of a stale work environment. And those that are actively disengaged, those are the people who really don't want to be there. Oftentimes we'll see more conflict occurring. Trust in leadership can be at an all-time low. You might have a couple of bad apples distracting their fellow co-workers in meetings and that type of thing. And some of these employees can really just bring the whole work environment down with their bad attitudes. So those are different ways you might see that play out. So that's how we categorize engagement. And now we're going to talk a little bit about some of the historical underpinnings of engagement. I think it's important to really understand where did this term engagement even come from? And essentially we go back to the 1980s. So this idea of engagement hasn't been around forever. And back in the 80s, the concept of employee satisfaction was pretty common. There's a lot of discussion among leaders and scholars around how happy were employees at work. And then in the 1990s, in 1990, Dr. Kahn introduced the concept of employee engagement in his seminal article that occurred. And with that, Gallup and other survey companies started to jump in the mid-90s and start to survey employees around the world on their level of engagement. Gallup has their Q12 survey questions that they ask. But there are other organizations that started to do assessments as well. And then in 2006, the Society for Human Resource Management, SHRM, published their first major article on employee engagement. And human resource professionals really started to jump on board of the idea of engagement, as well as the C-level leaders as well. And just last year, the International Standards Organization, I mentioned them earlier, I'm a part of that. The ISO is an organization that originally became very popular and well respected for its quality standards, is now establishing an international standard for employee engagement. So I think this idea of engagement is going to continue to build momentum and continue to be a big deal. So how is employee engagement measured? Again, I mentioned surveys are the most common. Sometimes we'll see a survey followed up with focus groups. There are different methods around culture assessments that occur. Those are typically done in group meetings. Surveys aren't always the best way to assess culture. Many organization development professionals will tell you. And then there are certain technologies that will help you monitor engagement as well, which we don't have a ton of time to go into today, but there's some emerging technologies that are pretty neat that help detect that. So what does employee engagement matter? Well, essentially, so many studies have been done now that correlate employee engagement to better results. The top graph is showing that the Good Company Index, which identifies organizations with high levels of employee engagement, has outperformed the S&P 500 stock index quite significantly over the last 16 years. And so this is a big deal. If you could guarantee that you're going to outperform the stock market, and there's a way to do that, I think just about everybody would put their money into that bucket. And more institutional investors, I mentioned the Human Capital Coalition below, as well as others are starting to recognize that and are asking companies what their levels of engagement are. And I mentioned ISO earlier, setting up their engagement standard. So I think that, this correlation is really important. It's got the attention of leaders, of investors, and certainly organizations are trying to create better work environments to retain their talent as well as attract new talent. The 100 best places to work, that's another way to measure engagement. They outperformed the S&P 500 fourfold from 1990 to 2009. Again, another study that correlated results to employee engagement. Aon has done a study that showed engaged workforces, had a shareholder return that was 54% higher than the average. And then SHRM did a study and found that fully engaged employees perform 20% better and are 87% less likely to leave than their peers. So I could go on and on and on with all kinds of studies that correlate engagement to results. But you get the idea. It intuitively makes sense, but it empirically makes sense as well. And why does it actually work? Well, if employees engaged, they're more likely to engage customers. And the more customers are engaged, the more the organization is likely to grow. So I'm sure you've walked into a retail store where you can feel like the employees are really happy and excited to be there versus one where they're really not. Or you're on the phone with a customer service person and you immediately get the sense that they're really there because they enjoy it versus an employee who just can't wait for the day to get over with. So that's that's one very tangible reason why employee engagement correlates so closely to results. There's something also called the social exchange theory, and this is where the organization or supervisor provides the employee with special recognition, rewards, flexibility in their work environment, and trust. And the employee really, really appreciates back that, and they pay it back many times over in their discretionary effort and their time. So that's the exchange that takes place between the employee and the organization. And then the socioeconomic approach to management is an organizational improvement system that roots out dysfunctions in organizations, and they've been doing this for over 30 years. And there are over 2,000 interventions that they've gone into organizations, and they've identified that hidden costs inside organizations due to dysfunctions average about $24,000 per employee per year. So that's a huge hidden cost expense that's occurring because employees are disengaged because of the way they're managed, the way they're organized. They're not appreciated, all kinds of factors that come into play there. So what we're offering is, if you're interested, we're happy to conduct a free pulse survey around employee engagement for your organization. Our company is called Transcend Engagement, and we're all about employee engagement. And if you're ever interested, we're very happy to come in to do a quick initial consultation with you. This is where we agree on the timeline, the logistics for getting the survey done, on the goals of the survey. We actually will administer and conduct the survey for you and then provide the results back to you. And we're very happy to do that free of charge. We thank you for your time today. And if you're interested, please contact us at www.transcendengagement.com. And we will follow up with you and be happy to conduct that pulse survey to give you some idea of where your employees stand on the question of employee engagement. So thank you for your time today. And with that, I wish you all the best.